We're going to hear now about the investment environment. So what are some of the enabling conditions required to move NBS forward in the Brazilian context as Brazil becomes this potential powerhouse on nature-based solutions? So I'm delighted to invite up to the stage Marcelo Brito, from the Consórcio Interestadual de Desenvolvimento Sustentável da Amazônia Legal, Marina Prochner, de Matos Filho, Valmir Ortega Belterra, Rafael Lima, IADB, Maria Belém Lozada, do Itaú, e Thiago Lang, da ON. While you are joining us on the stage, just a reminder for those who are still joining us, we do have the Q&A tool through Cvent. Do send us your questions through there, and you can direct them to specific panelists as well.
Bom dia. Good morning. Welcome. I'd like to thank you, especially thanks to Tony and his team for this kind invitation. It's a wonderful place to discuss this issue, investment environment in Brazil. We have been here about this, at least myself, in the past 40 years of my life. And everyone says that is too difficult. Let's see. Let's see. We will mix English and Portuguese in this panel, so please keep your translators ready whenever is necessary. Guys, the future of any country, any place, isn't what the climate risk tells us today. It's what we do about it. The first time I stopped my feet, I put my feet on the Amazon, in the Brazilian Amazon. I was 8 years old, 52 years ago. The first time I went back as a businessman, as an investor, as an executive of a big company, was in 1991, 33 years ago. In this meantime, we helped to put over $1.5 billion investment in the region. Risky? Yes. Difficult? Yes. Challenging? Of course. But we overcame all these issues because we can do that. We have the tools for that. Of course, before any investment, we have to run all those risks. Climate risks, financial risks, reputational risks, agronomical risks, absolute risks, all kinds of risks that you can choose. So in the real world, what are we doing here? Are we here to talk about risks? I don't think so. But opportunities, that's why we're here. Because somehow we are all ready to take risks at a certain level. After seeing what is happening in Rio Grande do Sul nowadays, let me ask you, what happened with all the risk assessments that were done by the investors in the past 20 years in the area? All those analyses are underwater right now. So in today's world, we have to balance the risk assessments with the benefit assessment. Yes, benefit. Benefit not only for businesses, but for the country, for nature, for our future. And those investors, the one who manage to balance benefit and risks, are the one leading the race. So what we're going to talk here today is not only about the risks, but all the tools that we have to overcome or to mitigate those risks. And we have this remarkable group of panelists here. I will not waste your time to read their CV. You already had in the app and and the event informations. So I will start with Marina Prognor from Partner as Matos Filho. Marina, welcome. And I would like to start with you question, what are the most common investment structure people are using when investing in Brazil?
Thank you, Marcelo. Good morning to everybody. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Capital for Climate and Tony for putting this event together. It's a high-level event. It's very nice to be here. Thank you for the invite, and it's an honor to be here with my fellow panelists. I was told that I had 5 minutes to talk about the most common investment structures that international capital uses in Brazil to invest in real assets and alternative assets, including private equity, VC, real estates, infrastructure, natural resources, land, carbon credit, and so on and so forth. And due to a number of regulatory and tax reasons, international capital comes to Brazil through investment funds. I could spend the whole day talking about those regulatory and tax aspects, but make sure that those are the most efficient and organized and transparent way of doing business in Brazil when you're talking about long-term real assets or alternative assets investments. Every investment fund in Brazil is regulated by the Securities Commission. At first, this can be seen as a burden because there are all the setup costs to set up a vehicle in Brazil. You have to hire licensed service providers. But the industry in Brazil is one of the most sophisticated and developed, the investment funds industry. We are reaching 10 trillion reais, the whole industry. The alternative assets and real assets still represents less than 10% of that, but it's also something that's evolving. And although it's regulated, it also represents that has transparency. We are aligned with international standards. We have, governance that has been tested. And I could say that in Brazil nowadays, we are able to set up club deals, co-investment vehicles, GPLP, traditional funds, in a very similar way than we see in Luxembourg, Delaware, Ontario, Cayman, and so on and so forth. So the good news is we are prepared to receive international capital in a very organized and regulated and transparent, very aligned, international standardized way. The bad news is that there is no one-size-fits-all solution to international capital to come to Brazil to invest in NBS. Why is that? Because the way our regulation was structured 10, 20 years ago, depending on who is investing, with whom you are investing, if you're investing by yourself, if you're investing with co-investors in Brazil, with pension plans, with multi-family offices, with retail investors, with only other international investors. If you're investing in equity, if you're giving credit, if you're buying land, if you're buying land in Brazil and abroad, so depending on the combination of these factors, you're going to use, in 95% of the cases, either a FIP, a FIDIC, or a FIAGRO. These are the names of these local vehicles that exist in Brazil right now and that are receiving a bunch of international capital that want to allocate capital in Brazil. FIPs are our private equity, private debt, VC type of fund. They can invest in equity or debt in companies onshore or offshore, but they cannot acquire real assets directly. They have to do that through legal entities. FIDICs are our securitization vehicle. They can basically finance any sector of the economy, and the international investors have been using those vehicles to basically operate as a bank in Brazil in a very regulated and authorized way without being a bank in Brazil. So it's something that has been happening, and it's very successful. And the FIAGRO, last but not least, is the most recent type of vehicle that was created. I like to call them our hedge fund, our agricultural hedge fund, because different than the FIPs that can only acquire companies, and the FIDICs that basically acquire receivables, FIAGROs can acquire everything: provided that they are investing in the agricultural sector. So they can acquire land, they can acquire carbon credit, despite of the law that hasn't already been enacted, but will be. So I agree with what was said in the last discussion. So Fiagros can buy real assets, companies, public companies, non-listed companies, but onshore. And I would say that what the main difference between Fiagros and FIPs is that if you're an international investor and you're allocating capital in a FIP, once you get your money out of Brazil, the portfolio level of the FIP is not subject to taxation. So, and when you distribute the money, you also don't pay any capital gain on that distribution. And then Fiagros, but you have the corporate tax on the entity that you're investing. So you don't pay tax on capital gain when you are distributing money abroad, but you are investing in a company that's subject to tax, corporate tax in Brazil. Fiagros, they can acquire land and real assets directly, so they don't need a legal entity. And since they don't need a legal entity, they are not subject to any type of corporate tax. But once they distribute the money abroad to international investors, there is a 15% tax on capital gain.
Marina,
Yes.
can you please wrap up?
Yes,
We need to move
that
to-
was the last thing that I would say is that my 5 minutes are up right now.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
but I think
But
it's
we
something
will,
that's
we will
nice.
come back on this
Okay.
later on, okay?
Fiagros can, differently from any other vehicle in Brazil, you guys probably heard about all the limitations of international investors owning land in Brazil. If you do that through Fiagros, you don't have this restriction. The law that created the Fiagro said that Fiagros that are owned 100% by international investors can own land by themselves without a co-investor in Brazil. So I think this is something that's new and has started being used by international investors. Sorry for the...
No problem. Switching to Portuguese. Valmir, bom dia, bem-vindo. Valmir, você vem liderando aí um processo de quebra de paradigma, mudança de pensamento dentro de estrutura de florestal e agrícola. O projeto que você coloca agora é um projeto que talvez nos leve a mudar o nome do arco do desmatamento, o arco da restauração. Então, nós já falamos aqui de um monte de riscos. Um dos grandes riscos, e o principal talvez, seja a estrutura fundiária da Amazônia. Funcionou? Opa, está aqui. Estrutura fundiária da Amazônia. Começa nos falando aí como é que você trabalhou essa estrutura olhando para o projeto da Belterra. Bem-vindo.
Obrigado, Marcelo. Bom dia a todos e todas. O tema da regulação fundiária é um dos grandes desafios que nós temos, especialmente na Amazônia, mas não apenas na Amazônia. Nós trabalhamos na Bahia, Minas Gerais, agora no Piauí. Em todos os estados que a gente trabalha, tem alguma fragilidade de documentação, de aspectos e tal. Então, esse é um tema ultra relevante. Ele é tão relevante que eu digo que a gente dá muita visibilidade, que é o que você acabou de falar, que às vezes a gente dá muita visibilidade para risco e pouca visibilidade para oportunidade. A gente dá tanta visibilidade para esse risco que a gente deixa de enxergar que a Amazônia é metade do Brasil. Nós não estamos falando de uma pequena porção do Brasil, nós estamos falando de metade do território brasileiro. Esse pedaço do território brasileiro tem uma história de ocupação de décadas. Parte dessa ocupação da Amazônia foi dirigida pelo governo brasileiro na década de 50, de 60, de 70, de 80, anos recentes com assentamentos rurais da reforma agrária. Toda essa ocupação dirigida pelo governo brasileiro tiveram diversos formatos de regularização da terra, né? Desde os projetos de colonização da década de 60, 70, 80. Então, pega o estado de Rondônia, por exemplo, a quase totalidade das áreas hoje ocupadas pela agricultura e pecuária do estado de Rondônia foram projetos de colonização. O norte do Mato Grosso, projetos de colonização dirigidos entre o governo e o setor privado, que fez amplas áreas de colonização, né? O estado do Pará, que é um estado que eu tive a oportunidade de trabalhar no governo, e eu acho que por isso, talvez, eu tenha menos preconceito a esses problemas, porque eu vi por dentro, né, muitos desses desafios e, portanto, das oportunidades. No estado do Pará, nós temos 12 milhões de hectares em assentamentos rurais. 12 milhões de hectares é 1/3 do estado de São Paulo, né, em assentamentos rurais, que são assentamentos rurais de pequenos produtores que foram assentados pelo governo. Portanto, eles podem não ter um título definitivo, mas eles têm plena legalidade da ocupação daquela terra. Quando a gente olha para a Amazônia toda, só de assentamentos rurais são 30 milhões de hectares. É quase o tamanho do estado de São Paulo inteiro, né? Quando a gente soma assentamentos rurais, terras de colonização privada e pública, etc., a gente deve estar falando algo próximo de 50 milhões de hectares, ou seja, próximo de uma Alemanha inteira de terras que foram tituladas ou colonizadas ou orientadas pelo governo nas décadas anteriores, né? Portanto, a gente tem uma imensa porção de terras que foram tituladas, regularizadas, assentadas. O grande desafio para um investidor é mapear e entender esse território, né? Como que, como investidor, como fundo, como empreendedor, a gente consegue entender onde que é seguro ir, onde não é seguro ir. Eu diria que o mapa que tem funcionado para a gente áreas que foram ocupadas ou desmatadas nos últimos 20, 25 anos são áreas de alto risco. Municípios ou regiões que tiveram altas taxas de desmatamento a partir da década de 90 para cá, provavelmente são municípios que têm alto percentual de terras públicas ocupadas regularmente, griladas, como a gente diz no Brasil, e etc. Portanto, são hotspots de risco, que a gente sabe que o risco de ter uma terra não regularizada são altos. Regiões que tiveram colonização, ocupação anterior à década de 60, 70, 80 e tal, provavelmente têm um alto percentual de terras tituladas, regularizadas. Então, é possível ter uma macrovisão desses riscos, e aí, claro, ao ir para o território, a gente tem muitas ferramentas no Brasil. Infelizmente, né, estou vendo aqui os colegas do governo federal, há enormes oportunidades de integrar melhor essas ferramentas. Só no governo federal nós temos pelo menos 4 cadastros de terras. Esses cadastros poderiam estar melhor integrados. Essa informação podia estar com maior visibilidade. Portanto, mas tem sido feito investimentos. Quer dizer, o cadastro ambiental rural é uma mega ferramenta de visibilidade, se não da parte fundiária, pelo menos da parte dos riscos associados a desmatamento. Mas a gente tem o CIGEF, que é um outro sistema de cadastro de terras, tem o CCIR, tem algumas ferramentas dessas que permitem a gente se aproximar. E, claro, a gente nunca vai abrir mão de uma due diligence no território, né, de uma due diligence documental, mas a gente pode encurtar muito o trabalho quando a gente consegue escolher previamente os territórios de menor risco para atuar e com maiores oportunidades.
Almir, deixa eu continuar com você. Tem um trabalho imenso sendo feito hoje pelos institutos de terra dos 9 estados da Amazônia Legal e do INCRA também. Você citou aí uma série de cadastros. Como que um sistema que dê mais transparência a todos esses cadastros poderia privilegiar investimentos na região, na sua visão?
Não, isso eu acho fundamental, Marcelo, e acho que aí tem uma oportunidade, inclusive, para o setor privado. Claro que grande parte dessas bases são bases de informações públicas, do setor público, algumas delas de acesso ao público, portanto, nós podemos acessar essas informações, mesmo a parte de registro de terras em cartórios, teoricamente, é uma informação de acesso a público, é óbvio que é virtualmente impossível você acessar todas as matrículas, porque não há uma base digital disso centralizada, mas você pode fazer consulta, né, a esses cartórios de registro de imóveis para verificar, né, o histórico da ocupação dessa terra. Então, eu digo que tem 2 desafios. Um para o setor público, que eu acho que vem tendo investimentos, como você próprio destacou, os serviços de terras dos estados têm passado por modernização. Eu pude acompanhar no estado do Pará esse esforço que continua até hoje, né, de digitalização das bases fundiárias do estado, digitalização dos cadastros de terras do estado, ações coordenadas territoriais, né, talvez o Raul tenha falado aqui, tem várias iniciativas que o governo do estado do Pará realizou nos últimos anos de acelerar a regularização de territórios que tinham fragilidade documental, né, para dar garantia a esses produtores de terem o título definitivo. Então, há muito espaço para o setor público. Na esfera federal, eu diria que integrar bases de dados que combinem o que o CAR disponibiliza hoje sobre uso e ocupação da terra, né, com bases de dados como o CIGEF, como base de dados da Receita Federal, hoje que coleta dados das propriedades e tal, a gente poderia ter diferentes camadas que, se não dessem 100% de garantia sobre a titularidade da terra, dariam uma camada de segurança muito relevante. E eu acho que há oportunidades para o setor privado, considerando que parte desses dados são públicos, né, e podem ser acessados por diferentes setores, empresas de inteligência, de análise de informações territoriais, podem ir agregando ferramentas para isso, né? Nós usamos várias ferramentas privadas de startups brasileiras, de empresas brasileiras consolidadas que permitem fazer análise territorial e que aceleram a análise sobre dados de terra. Eu acho que ainda há oportunidade para desenvolver muitos novos negócios nessa área.
Obrigado, Valmir. Maria Belém, welcome. Maria is from Itaú BBA Bank. She's head of carbon solutions. Maria, Brazil has a very sophisticated financial and capital markets. We heard from IDB on EcoInvest about all these issues. But let's suppose this program didn't exist, the one from IDB. So what can you tell us about the Brazilian currency and hedging markets, its debt, liquidity, tenors available, etc.?
Thank you, Marcelo. I'll do my best. My background is actually derivatives before I joined carbon, so I can, it's like talking about my old love. So the Brazilian derivatives market is extremely deep, liquid. Most of the liquidity is in the local market. The FX market trades every day without the interbank, just the actual trading on the exchange, something like $7 billion. 70% of that is flows from investors, and 30% of that is trade, so import and export hedging. That means we have a very healthy two-way flow, so investors coming into Brazil, and also the actual Brazilian industry and agri sector hedging their exports and imports. Like I said, the liquidity for regulatory reasons and tax reasons, it's mostly in the local market, but both local banks, such as Itaú and Santander, that we consider a local bank, and international banks, so Citi, JP Morgan, they're very active both in the local market and the offshore market. We created some sort of liquidity pool offshore. There is a small on-off spread, but it's nothing terrible. And so we do provide solutions in both markets. The options market, which is very relevant to the equity investors, extremely liquid. Particularly up to 2 years, but there is also very decent liquidity from 3 to 5 years onwards. On the equity investors, the thing that we do the most is contingent hedging, and that is for infrastructure purposes. So, example, if you are buying an asset in Brazil and you have some sort of regulatory approval that you have to go through, and you're not sure that the transaction will actually go through, but you have to hedge your FX exposure, we do a hedge that we call contingent to that particular approval. And that means that you're only going to be hedged if the transaction goes ahead. And this is a common practice in Brazil. It's been for many, many years. Like I said, Brazil is very sophisticated, both in the capital markets and the derivatives market. And that is also partially because of the presence of foreign banks in the local market. Now, talking about cross-currency swaps, and this is when you have a debt in dollars, and then you swap those flows from the debt to reais to be able to fund a project locally. Very common. We do this every single day. The international market, the debt market, that is also, I worked many years in New York. So usually the issuances are around $500 million, and we hedge most of it, usually in 2 tranches or in one single tranche, up to 10 years. Very common as well. And Brazilian corporates that issue bonds offshore and they swap in the local market, they don't like posting margins. So most of these lines are, by the way, they're clean. I mean, for large corporates, they're clean. So we don't have a lot of margining problems for large corporates. But then I'll tell you where we do have problems, so I can help explain why the program was put together. So the carry in Brazil is very high. So everything that is blended finance, that is cheaper than local rates, is always very welcome. The liquidity of the cross-currency basis, so the spread between dollars and reais in the basis, from 5 years onwards is less liquid, and it's more expensive if you have higher volumes. That's where we also need help. Margining and credit lines for those corporates that are not like well-established corporates, like if you have a financial sponsor, for example, that doesn't have cash flow to give you in a margin call. That's where we actually need more help. And tail risk for equities, for equity investors, is also one of the requirements of the program that the IDB is putting together. Thank you.
Thank you. I will come back to you with another important question, but now switching to Rafael. Welcome. from IDB. Rafael, you will speak about this issue in greater detail, I think, during lunchtime today, if I'm not wrong. But what could you tell us about this Eco-Invest and what you aim to do and how it can be applied to nature-based solution sector in Brazil?
Thank you, Marcelo. It's a pleasure being here. Thank you for the invite and to share with this panel. I'll take a step back a little bit to provide a more macro context, and then I'll contextualize the Eco-Invest, which is not an IDB program. It's a Brazil government program the IDB is sponsoring to structure. I think it's important to keep that in mind. But it's an honor for us to have been called to do that, right? I think what I heard from the previous panel, Garo spoke very well about it. I think that is undoubtedly. Global temps are quickly approaching critical climate tipping points. Brazil has reaffirmed commitments to combat climate change, lower GHG emissions by 2025, 2030, get to neutrality by 2050. To do that, Brazil needs essentially to do two things. One, continue its progress on the energy side, which is advanced. It's more advanced than most of the countries. So more renewable energy mix and so on. But it also needs to speed up the other side, which is the ecological transformation piece. So zeroing deforestation, preserving standing forests, restoring degraded lands, right? And I think here is where the NBS, nature-based solutions, which are cost-effective measures that can support Brazil to achieve those commitments. So it's very central, it's a very important concept, right? But they also deliver wide range of benefits to society as a whole. So it's a good way to do and meet your commitments, right? And then I bring a little bit to the investment side. So to achieve this goal, Brazil specifically will need significant investments, which can only materialize given savings if the private sector takes its part, and that has been spoken, and if we're able to mobilize foreign private capital, foreign savings, and bring them to Brazil. But what is essentially a barrier to this process, and not only in Brazil, is cost of capital. Cost of capital has been one critical obstacle for financing flows to come southwards. And the reason to that is that cost of capitals in emerging markets are 2-3 times higher than in consolidated. We have in the Eco-Invest presentation, Europe for a solar plant, 4% weighted average cost of capital. Emerging markets, 10.1. Brazil, 12.3. It's 3 times. So how you unbundle that risk? So unless we address this barrier, ecological transformation can happen, but it will not happen at the scale and certainly not at the pace that it's needed to achieve those goals or to meet those objectives, right? So up until now, and we heard a lot about it, a lot of our efforts to reduce cost of capital has been micro risks, talking again about risk. So contracts, legal environment, regulatory environment, technological risks to de-risk the projects. But what we see is there is always a floor to this equation, and the floor is the macro piece. The macro is effects, is counterpart risks, and so on, right? So historically, development banks has done its part to step in and support, but they can do as much. For us to unlock the private sector side of this and essentially do the structural shift, we need to pursue or continue on the tax reforms. Brazil has upgraded its rating. The Plano de Transformação Ecológica has been put in place. And that's where Eco-Invest comes into place. It complements these other windows, the development banks, by targeting specifically the drivers of foreign capital to Brazil. And we're doing that through a suite of products. Eco-Invest attempts to unbundle these effects risk, essentially reducing the cost potentially, but certainly enabling the supply of hedges with terms and conditions that are not available. And the type of hedges, not only total swaps, but options for tail risk. And to do a suite of products that are not necessarily betting only on a whole flow swap. So you can choose how to mitigate your risk through a suite of products, right? So the IDB has been supporting the Treasury of Brazil and the Brazilian government through a line of credit that has a policy-based support, but also technical assistance to structure the lines of credit, which are something that was enabled by the UK government, I would like to say. There are 4 lines. A blended finance line, which essentially allows us to bring foreign capital in, but to reduce the cost of credit locally by providing a blended finance line through public support. So you lower the cost of financing, provided that you bring foreign capital in. We have an FX liquidity line. So throughout a long-term investment, you go through bumps on the road, right? Sometimes the FX go a little high, a little low, but unless there is a structural devaluation, you can manage that through perhaps providing additional debt to that structure if that project has a revenue stream that is either inflation adjusted or PPP adjusted or eventually dollarized, like carbon credits, for instance. So we can do that. We can do FX derivatives. We can support traders like Itaú to take counterpart risk, to take and sell options on a payment plan instead of charging for the option up front. And in doing that, we can deepen the market. And finally, there is project preparation. We can do project preparation much more effective. So to bring it home, and I will conclude, what it means to NBS market. I think EcoInvest can support to create an environment that is conducive to investments in the sector. And in doing so, we are mitigating risks and boosting investor confidence. So specifically, we're also speeding up FIs to look at the sector, to take this kind of risk, and to essentially support the development of this industry. So I think EcoInvest presents a paradigm change. Instead of stepping in to provide financing through development banks, it complements this line of business by de-risking private sector debt, private sector equity to this sector and others linked to a broader policy, which is the ecological transformation plan of Brazil. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much to remind us that we have a homework to do. We are usually very fast in plans in Brazil, very slow in implementation. So thanks for reminding us. Thiago, welcome. The guy from the insurance sector. Looking to Rio Grande do Sul right now, I believe they are having lots of meeting lately. But Thiago, could you tell me about the role of insurance in mitigating carbon delivery risk, please?
Thanks, Marcelo. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Viviane, Tony, for the opportunity to be here. And thanks for the panelists. As James said, we are all learning here. I think I've been learning a lot during the preparation for today. And I think we have the role as insurance broker to actually teach the market as well, to educate the market. The insurance market always goes a little bit behind the financial market. So we have this role of educating the market and develop innovations that unlock capital and bring investment to NBS and climate as general. So going straight to the point, we've been in the last 18 months at least working a lot to study all the life cycle of a carbon project or every NBS project. And in the beginning, we only had specific policies for each period. And this is the way that the insurance market pretty works in silos. So if you want fire insurance, you're going to have fire insurance. If you want to have some other peril, you're going to buy that specific policy. And this year, I think that the great news is that we've just developed with the international market a policy that will cover the delivery of the carbon. So this will cover almost all risks. There's a few exclusions, such as terrorism or cyber risks. But in overall, we're going to cover all the credit that is due to the purchaser to the off-taker of the credit. This is still under evolution. I think some of the people here are actually involved in quotes and studies and helping the product to be developed. The idea here is to, in the end of the day, to bring more quality to to the delivery of the credit, it's going to have a different stamp from the insurance market to that project, because in the end of the day, insurance market is going to underwrite, they are going to be in the field, understanding the risks, and going to stamp that carbon, saying, well, this is a high quality carbon. So the idea here is both for investors and purchasers to buy this product together with developers of the projects. In the end of the day, this can also replace guarantees such as letters of credit or other products that are involved in this mitigation under the contracts.
Thank you, Thiago. Maria, I'd like to go back to you after knowing that we have new insurance bases in Brazil. What is the liquidity and the investments available in the capital markets to finance nature-based solutions in Brazil?
Well, nature-based solutions is a whole different ballgame, but I'll tell you what the instruments are in the capital market. So the Brazilian capital market is very deep, very liquid, extremely sophisticated. Both the banks and the fixed income funds participate very actively in the debentures market. It's a huge market in Brazil. Pessoa física, which is like physical people, private investors. We don't have pension funds in Brazil, so private investors can buy through their bank accounts, XP, that kind of thing. Infrastructure bonds that are inflation linked, they're very long tenor, and it could also be an instrument, and they're tax exempt. And it could also be an instrument that could be applied to probably nature-based solutions. The banks offshore can also lend through a 4131 law that allows foreign banks to lend from their subsidiaries and branches offshore with a tax benefit and swap that to local currency. That is a market that today is about $30 billion. So there's a lot of funding already coming through offshore banks. But finally, I would say that the capital markets in Brazil, and I participated through a number of financing in infrastructure projects and clean energy in the last 15 years.
I got you.
And the level of funding that you can get in reais is so high that you don't need a lot of dollar funding to swap to reais. There is actually a lot of availability locally for most of the projects. So when the project is very large, you will have some blend, or when you need some cheaper financing, and then you'll have the blend financing. That's on the what I would say on the matter.
Thank you so much. Marina, you talked a little bit about Fiagros. So just to explain more broadly to the foreigner audience here. Lately, we had some Fiagros that was very successful, but some of them not really. How can we improve this? We are an agro country, so the opportunities on the agribusiness in Brazil are huge, and Fiagros are very important. So how can we improve Fiagros to be a really suitable tool for investors in Brazil?
Marcelo, I think what Fiagros are going through right now, it's less related to the infrastructure of the product and how it's regulated and the governance per se, and more related with the troubles that the industry had lately. The majority of the products that were well structured and had the majority of them that exist right now, they finance projects through CRAS. CRAS are securitization certificates that finance small farming activities, and usually they have real assets collateral. And the majority of the Fiagros that have been investing in well-structured CRAS, because they have good sponsors that have good fiduciary duty and did their job and implemented the mandate that they were hired to implement, they are foreclosuring the collateral, they are getting farms and land in payment, and they are being able to pay back their investors. So it's a stressful scenario it's a scenario that we had some trouble with the agricultural sector in certain specific areas. And the ones that were well structured, they are doing fine. I think when you bring more international capital, more institutional capital to this type of these products, because right now FIAGs are basically sold to individuals, retail investors, right? This is something. Why is that? Because FIAGROs to retail investors in Brazil are tax-free. So you invest in a FIAGRO, FIAGROs are financing the agriculture sector, and you have a dividend yield that's tax-exempt. And you can, usually FIAGROs are listed on a stock exchange, just the way the product was conceived in Brazil. It doesn't have to be like that, but that's how the majority of the portfolio managers do. And they fundraise with the retail investors. Retail investors allocate capital there because they are tax-free. But again, it's a type of public that not necessarily knows what the portfolio managers are doing and are not sophisticated, right? Are retail investors. So I believe that when you're talking about NBS, we're talking about international investors, institutional investors that are going to bring supervision rights. They are going to be observatory rights. They are going to have observatory rights in the FIAGROs. They're going to select the best and the right sponsors and portfolio managers to implement their strategy. All the right tools and the legal requirements and the regulatory and the transparency is already here. It's not a question of what we need to have. It's more a question of what we need to make sure is negotiated among GPs and LPs. This is my view.
Thank you so much. Now we'll move to questions from the audience. Please use your app to set your questions. We have one for the group, so whenever wants to grab, do it, please. The question from Maíra Sugawara. Thank you, Maíra. For investments to have a real impact, they must have an unified focus to prevent climate risks. We have many bases to consult. How predicting investments that will really prepare society and business for future climate change scenarios? So how to predict that? Who wants to grab? Who wants to answer?
Well, I can go first. The person of the risk insurance. I think this is, and you mentioned, Marcelo, about what's sadly happening in the Rio Grande do Sul, but this is something that we in Brazil are not used to think and to actually realize about the climate change. But if you think it's once in a while and more frequently, we have catastrophes or big losses, being a dry or being excess of rain. And there are tools, there are companies within this room as well that have that help promoting and putting together all the data necessary for us to model the risk and to understand the probable maximum loss, the possibilities of loss for the investment, or including for the cities. So you can imagine, for example, a flood modeling tool that's available in other markets. In Brazil, this also will be more and more important, such as already happens in Latin America with earthquakes and hurricanes in other parts of the region. So I think that's the first part. And then the second part is, well, once you understand what are the risks, what you're going to do with this, and the market has to be prepared to understand these risks and the total cost of risk for the company and for an investment fund, for example, and for the society. So that's where government plays a role to also help the people to have a type of microinsurance or something like that that protects people also in the crisis.
I wanted to add that from a capital markets perspective, the financial disclosures are paramount to have enough information on what the climate scenarios will be and how could affect our businesses. So the new regulation that the SEC came out with recently, that it's under public consultation again, is on hold for some lobbying reason, is supposed to address exactly this. The whole point is for publicly traded companies or companies that have fixed income bonds and report to the SEC, they have to report how the climate risk could affect their businesses going forward, right? And then you can make informed decisions. That is the whole point. So financial disclosure, it's a big part of what we need to push forward so we can get on with this agenda.
And from
No, go. You. I talked too much already. No, go ahead.
from the multilateral standpoint, I think things that we do that's part of our core businesses tend to be to support the countries in promoting low carbon, climate resilience, development approaches, institutionality, so that within the regulatory environment of the country, some of the tools are there to assess projects, and especially if public resources are to channel there, that essentially you have some safeguards, but also ways to look at the climate risk impact. For instance, in the IDB, starting in January 1st, 2023, last year, we are assessing all our operations, seeking to ensure that they do not obstruct transition to low green gas and climate resilience economies in line with the Paris Alignment and the Paris Agreement. So we make sure that those are aligned. Essentially, this is going to trickle down to the financial sector, at least from the banking standpoint, from disclosures. I believe that this is going to be a part of the doing business and how we manage this systemically speaking, which will eventually reduce premium for insurance and have other additionalities to consider.
Thank you. Marina, would you like to add?
I was just going to add a point that Maria made. Both the Securities Commission in Brazil and the Central Bank have been discussing and putting in place several disclosure rules on this matter. And most recently, we have been having this discussion on how you attach fiduciary duty of sponsors with ESG factors as well. So not only to be concerned about public companies and financial institutions, but also, regardless if you are a green fund or not, an ESG fund or not, how you as a portfolio manager should be concerned about these and how you should be prepared and how you should be disclosing information on that, regardless if you have a stamp of green, ESG, impact fund, and so on and so forth. So I think this is something to complement Maria's point.
Thank you so much.
Marcelo, só complemento, para além do olhar financeiro e dos mecanismos de seguro e outros, eu acho que é importante a gente olhar o design do modelo produtivo, né? Então, quando a gente fala de agricultura, uso da terra, nós precisamos olhar para sistemas produtivos mais resilientes às mudanças climáticas. O clima está mudando, não tem mais dúvida. Portanto, regiões se tornarão mais secas, algumas se tornarão mais úmidas, regiões ficarão mais quentes. Portanto, os nossos modelos produtivos têm que estar adaptados. Então, sistemas agroflorestais, sistemas de integração lavoura, pecuária, floresta, silvicultura, são modelos que tornam os nossos sistemas produtivos mais resilientes. Então, tem um desafio, assim como as cidades, né? A gente tem que criar cidades mais resilientes, porque nós teremos mais problemas no futuro, estamos tendo problemas no presente. Então, acho que tem que combinar inteligência financeira com transformação dos modelos produtivos, né?
Perfeito, obrigado. Tiago, I have a question direct to you. Como você enxerga que as soluções de transferência de riscos para os créditos de carbono alavanquem a entrada and business for future climate change scenarios? Pergunta em inglês, português. Está ali direto, se você quiser.
Estou pensando
tá
aqui
ali,
se eu
ó.
respondo em português. Well, as we have products of insurance and also modeling tools that make all investors rely much more on the market. So this is going to bring more capital. I think, and that's, I don't know if it's my last remarks. So I really ask you and everyone to think on insurance since the beginning of an operation or a vehicle or investment in Brazil. You can go as a project finance that you do for infrastructure. Now, that's the same thing that we could do for nature-based solutions in climate.
Yep.
That's the thunder.
Maybe.
So this is going to bring more capital because the insurance market is going to give a stamp for the credit that's going to be sold, and that's going to be a much more reliable investment. And also going back to Marina's point on, for example, FIDICs and FIAGROs, other products are available, such as surety, bonds, trade credit, and other tools that can be embedded into a product. We had a case, it was a very simple case, but very nice to tell. It's a green CRA, and then the cattle was given as a collateral, but that was insured with a tailor-made proposition for that cattle. So this enhanced the tool and made investors more confident on that paper specifically.
Thank you, Thiago. Well, we are running out of time, but I don't want to leave without asking you guys, and you're going to have 1 minute each to convince all the investors that are here to invest in Brazil. In 1 minute. Who wants to start?
I start. Itaú always starts. This always happens. So I run the carbon desk at Itaú, and the projects that we see are, for reforestation at least, the agroforestry, not the pulp and paper ones. They are, $50, $60 million projects. They are not that big, and we can finance them directly. The risk of those projects is it's more challenging, the equity risk. So I think we can think of all the fancy solutions, but since the projects are small and the investment is done in installments throughout 10, 15 years, because it takes a long time to plant, we need to start working on this market, perhaps not waiting until the regulation is ready, but the projects are out there, and start investing as they are, because they're not that big. And we can put them together with a little effort.
Thank you. Palmir? Tá ligado.
Falando do lado dos empreendedores, eu acho que nós vamos ter uma amostra aqui neste evento de um grupo de empresas na parte da tarde apresentando soluções. É um pequeno grupo, mas muito representativo do trabalho que a equipe fez aqui de fazer uma curadoria para apresentar essas soluções. Certamente nós temos milhares de novos negócios no Brasil apresentando soluções baseadas na natureza, soluções climáticas baseadas na natureza. E eu acho que a grande oportunidade do Brasil é que nós temos um grande território, né, que, do ponto de vista de oportunidades para soluções baseadas na natureza, o Brasil é ultra competitivo no sentido do território, do clima, das oportunidades, e a gente tem um mercado consumidor relevante que pode prover o arranque para esses mercados até que a gente alcance mercados internacionais. Portanto, acho que a combinação de território, mercado e capacidade empreendedora são boas oportunidades para se investir no Brasil, e a gente tem uma oferta de soluções sendo construídas, desenvolvidas, que eu acho que pode dar o arranque em escala para soluções que, de fato, contribuam para o mundo enfrentar os desafios climáticos que nós temos.
Obrigado, Palmir. Rafael?
In English, no? I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a country today that has put a policy framework such as Brazil has done with the Ecological Transformation Plan, Nova Indústria Brasil, looking at the whole prisma and how Brazil ecological transformation can be moved forward, paired with structural reforms from the tax side, from the fiscal side, and promoting programs on the investment attraction side of things. So what I hope is that the combination of those elements, I think, seeks to inspire, if not inspire indeed, the confidence of the investors to look at Brazil and give Brazil a chance. I think Brazil has another side of things. Things tend to be big here because of the scale of the country. But that's also an opportunity, right? You can scale up, you can do things that can meaningfully yield returns from a financial standpoint, but has global impact. So if you want to do capital and bring capital for climate, this is a country that presents a combination of factors that lead to an opportunity that's very unique. And I think these policies, these programs, as they kind of juncture together, I think you start seeing these flows. And I think what we need as policy supporters, policymakers, some of the governments that spoke before, is to truly understand from you what the nature-based solution financing framework, project structuring needs, and how can we adapt the policy or support the policy and the programs to be tailored or to think of this niche concretely. So that is a little bit of learning from our side as well, and I think this opportunity presents just that, an opportunity for us to trade ideas and to learn from you as well.
Thank you so much. Marina?
I would say that we have the right legal framework. Brazil has already tested very sophisticated structures. We have a number of international investors already doing business and doing really well in Brazil, endowments, sovereign funds, institutional investors, a bunch of local and international sponsors looking at this team in Brazil and fundraising for the first or second or third fund. Again, I agree with Maria. The transactions are not enormous. You don't need more than $10 million to set up a FIP or a FDIC or FIAGRO. And if it's an amount that's lower than that, use other instruments that exist, the CRAS and other instruments that are available. So it's a sophisticated market with the right incentives from a tax regulatory perspective, transparent, with good governance, and very serious players on the ground.
Thank you. Thiago, last but not least.
Yeah. So I think we don't need to convince anyone. Tony is doing that for us, right? Brazil is the place to be when we're talking about climate and nature-based solutions. So just don't think that, although challenging, the risks are unbearable. We have lots of tools and a sophisticated market that can help anyone to be successful on business in Brazil.
Thank you, Thiago. Well, guys, you heard, we have the necessary tools to invest in Brazil. I just came back from Asia, and when I realized that China planted over 8 million hectares of forests in the past 2 years, and they reformed over 4 million hectares of pasture, if they did that, we can do much better here. You heard about it. We have the tools, we have the capacities, we have available land, we have everything that is necessary here. Let's balance benefit and risks, and you will see that Brazil is the place to invest right now. So let's give these guys a big round of applause. Thank you very much.